So welcome everyone, good evening. A nice summer evening here almost. So thanks especially for being here when the weather's so nice. So welcome back FAC members. This is our 6th meeting of 8 that are scheduled going back to our origin, our first meeting back in April. Also welcome and glad you are here, audience members, to observe this working meeting of the FAC, the Facility Advisory Committee. Again, our 6th meeting. We've been working on these important tasks for some time. Glad that you're engaged in learning more. My name is Joe Schrader. In case you're curious, I don't live in the community. I'm a Wisconsin-based education consultant, and I've been hired by the system to help with the various tasks of the committee. And that's something I do in my decades of work in this field. So again, thanks for being here as observers tonight. And let's get underway and talking about what our work is today. So our agenda is, as you see it here, we're going to start with the second part, which is the second item, I should say, is to just reground ourselves back in the developments of the last meeting. We had some significant developments, and we want to start from there because that actually helps put top of mind what we have to do today and also gives us a foundation for further progress on the task before us. Third item is we're going to particularly see if there's some more refinement around elementary school consolidation options. We had some that as we continue to try to narrow all the potential options for potential closure. Again, that we would see if there's some further refinement of that. Clearly last time the sense of a paired option is the clear consensus of the group, but we'll see if we can get further with that tonight. We're also going to try to get further into, if there were changes, what would be some of the refinements around, as necessary, around attendance boundaries with the reconfiguration of schools. So we'll do that together in the presentation, and then we'll break those two discussion items out separately, as you see under particularly 4 as well. So, and 5. So 5 will be our first table discussion. We'll talk about getting input about whatever consolidation options might be moving forward, to talk about like what the boundaries might look like in a fair manner for that. Then we're going to move into our third item of the night, which is around the secondary facility options. Again, we've been looking at that the last couple meetings. We have particular potential budget estimates. We have Clint Selly from Bray Architects here with Mr. Levina to talk further about that. You asked for information. We'll do that as well. And then get your table team input on that as well as we continue to work through our process. And then we'll have you on your way by 8:30 is the plan again, or sooner, and get the feedback as always. So that's a quick little run through of our agenda tonight. Here are our norms again. You've really been doing a fantastic job on this. Again, our norms are what we use to help be our best selves, to work productively together around these difficult challenges. So thanks again for doing that. Again, I'm going to ask you as always to kind of put top of mind the one that is the most stretch for you, the one that you want to set an intention around. And again, I expect that we'll probably particularly have to use several of these today. Again, it's just reminders. The decisions through consensus will always be one I'm usually making this part of the process. We get into the latter stages of a multi-meeting process where there have to be some recommendations coming forward. In other words, some decisions about advisement coming forward. So that's the agenda, and so let's look at the last meeting. Again, these are the 3 items we did, if you remember. So we refined elementary consolidation options. We're going to review that today in a moment. We evaluated elementary boundary options a little bit further. We're going to get even deeper into that today. And again, we explored secondary facility options. So again, we're going to come back to all 3. It's just that they're in different stages of narrowing and trying to work through a kind of an ultimate recommendation in an advisory fashion to the school board. So your exit slip feedback from last time went well. You can see discussion, individual input, some call it voting, but individual input to the options around consolidation, and then some of the visuals that help with people making sense and getting clearer about what might have their support the most with some of these hard decisions. What could be improved? Again, there's a data piece, particularly a table. You might remember a couple of you had questions. We're going to start with that in a moment. We'll just show you different ways to get at that and make sense of it and how that can help you with your continued deliberations. A little more details, and then those details you'll see here. So you're going to see, like as always, again, your input to us helps the planning team figure out what you next need. And so you're going to see more details around boundary changes and impacts now that there's narrowed options, like what would be the specific detail around some of those narrowed options. You'll see that. What are maybe be some choices if there are school closures around some choice options, and then also cost and budget details. So you'll see that today. We always get QR forms are at the table. Again, for the folks in the audience, again, the planning team does respond to these if they come from you as well. But you'll see, and again, throughout this process, there's a dedicated space in the district website for the agendas, the developments, the input. All this is available online and has been for months. But just a few that came up last time, which we were highlighting today because they might be relevant to what the topics are at hand. So Katie from the committee asked, which is the bigger financial benefit of consolidating schools, staffing, operations, maintenance, et cetera. So again, the reply from the district here is the primary financial benefit of consolidating schools is the efficiency gain through staffing. For example, if the two schools with the highest maintenance costs were closed, we would avoid about $6 million in maintenance costs over 20 years. On the other hand, with the closure of any two schools, we anticipate an annual staffing savings of $2.4 million or totaling $48 million over 20 years. In my math, that seems like, so the difference would be about 12 to 13% in maintenance for what you see with that. It's a pretty stark difference in the maintenance costs versus the staffing cost savings, if you will. So while the maintenance costs are important to consider, the staffing efficiencies of consolidation are a far bigger driver of cost savings long term. So hope that answers Katie's question. Another question that came up was from Joan. Would like to see busing costs and the amount for added routes, and particularly I think in relation to the schools being considered for consolidation as this continued to narrow. So in general, a bus route costs about $70,000 a year for an AM/PM route. Again, for the committee members, that's a review. I think that's been shared for some months now. The impact of the closure of North Woods would likely result in the reduction of one bus route. The impact of the closure of Emerson would likely result in the addition of 3 routes, whereas the impact of the closure of Spencer-Hinchin would not lead to a change in the number of bus routes. So there's some variance there, right? And then as a reminder, a couple things. State law dictates that transportation must be provided for students that live more than 2 miles from their school. That's just statewide law. Every district has that as part of their situation and context in these situations. And then lastly, the savings costs of busing are relatively low, 3 to 10% compared to the personnel efficiencies gained. So again, similar to the thing here about what about maintenance? Yes, there are definitely some costs, and you can see that. And similar with, transportation, and there's some variance. And then again, it's a smaller portion significantly to the staffing savings in the overall consideration of those issues. And then finally from the FAC last time, Paisley asked, what will happen to International Baccalaureate or IB program if Northwoods were to close? And the district's response is, given the district's investment in the IB program and the desire by many parents and staff to continue the choice program, we would move the program to another location. An example of what could happen is the program could move to Northside Elementary as a choice option on a traditional calendar, and Cooley Montessori could move to Summit Elementary to provide more outdoor and natural space to align with the Montessori philosophy. So as an example, but again, the idea being that there would be, the program would move to another location, the option would still be available. And then we had one more that we're going to highlight today from a community member at the last meeting, Carmen DeYo. What would resale potential be for Northwoods, building and property? The building doesn't seem viable for other uses. Again, from Carmen, was that comment in question? The response after the bullet is the building could be viable for a variety of repurposed uses now and in the future for the school district. The range of options are substantial, and some options could potentially offer a site for athletic fields, a site for administration, a daycare, a 4K center, an outdoor learning facility, a consolidated charter school location, a community garden, or a community center. So again, options there. So again, that would be, again, a variety of repurposed uses, if that were to be the case, are possible. So going into this was the table people had questions about. I'm going to ask Dr. Engel to come and just talk through this for clarification from last meeting.
I would like to follow up on the last slide just a little bit too. It talked about like viable for resale. There's a number of different thoughts about that. A short-term view might be we have declining enrollment. We don't need that space. We could sell it. Could be redeveloped. A longer-term view of spaces, we don't know what's going to happen to student populations in 20, 30, 50 years. They're not making new land. It's hard to acquire. When you want to, it's expensive. So the school district might think a longer-term view says hold on to that property, repurpose it for the time being for the benefit of our community, but selling it may not be a wise choice if you want to adapt to the future. Many governments in our area hold on to property, that reuse it for the time being, and to be prepared to be flexible into the future. So there's a good chance that the school district would hold on to those properties even if they weren't used as schools anymore, to be flexible for the future. It would be a conversation the board would have to have and think about and balance all of that. This one, I apologize for being gone last month. I've never been sicker since I was with pneumonia as a 12-year-old. It was awful. And my child had it the week prior, and I was thinking, oh my God, this kid's pathetic. And then not 5 days later, I'm like whimpering in the morning as I wake up. So I apologize for not being here and hope I can address this. And he made sure to tell me. So last time I think there was a little confusion about busing costs. I think we kind of covered that a little bit already in one of those FAQs. The other thing was about deferred maintenance, and we had tried to annualize it to kind of put it in here, but that could be confusing certainly because it's not a guaranteed expense every year. And so on this second table, we just kind of pulled it out as a total cost, kind of cost avoidance. It's stuff that we anticipate doing over 20 years, but isn't necessarily an immediate priority. We have the next 5 years scheduled out, and some of it includes that, but it isn't a guarantee that we're going to do those things necessarily. Does that help paint a more clear picture for folks? I'm happy to answer any questions around these two tables and hope the second one is more provides more clarity for folks.
Steve? I think you had one of the questions around this, so it's a good person to follow up here.
Yeah, Aaron, that's really helpful, I think, in our analysis of trying to understand. I noticed that, and I was one of the people that asked for us to add this, and that the estimated annual savings of consolidation is relatively the same for operations, staffing. It's the deferred maintenance that saves additional. Whether or not that's the best consideration for the school board and administration, it influences my recommendation as we think about these things, but there's quite a huge difference. The Northwoods and Hinchin doesn't save all that much in maintenance, whereas I was surprised Emerson and Spence saved such a significant amount. So, and applause to the school board and administration for your action on closing of the middle school that saved, I think, $5 or $6 million, just as an example, by consolidating down to 2 junior highs. So that, I think that's significant in how you make decisions and how we make recommendations, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Engel. So again, regrounding in the last meeting, again, that was your feedback essentially in response to some questions and a clarification on the table. So now we'll get into the regrounding. So again, we continue to work on this model where we have various tasks to do. You saw them pretty much in the agenda foci for today and last month even, around elementary consolidations, elementary boundaries, secondary, having a kind of a look at trying to find equal ways of providing similar experiences and facilities regardless of secondary schools where students are. So those are some of the big tasks. And for any of those, as we work through them, we're trying to work from like exploring the issues to evaluating some of those issues per some criteria or parameters, and then trying to actually refine our thinking as a committee into and I should say your thinking as a committee, I don't vote on this, but your thinking as a committee in an advisory fashion to the school board ultimately. So again, just in case people have questions about this, again, this is, our committee has seen this for quite a few months now, for pretty much the entirety, I think. But in case you haven't seen this, so we might be wondering, like, why is an FAC consolidation recommendation needed anyway? There are financial reasons, and this is a summary slide. We went into great detail back in the spring, the first couple sessions, but this is one slide that tries to just capture the big ideas. Financially, there's an ongoing declining enrollment underway, and it's very clear in the school district. Secondly, that there's significant financial challenges, even with a successful operational referendum and a series of those that have happened. There's still, again, beyond that, there's significant financial challenges. And then thirdly, there's excess space, notable excess space in district buildings to allow this, and probably to say, for reasons Steve just said, to actually encourage it and responsibly to do so. Instructionally, there's also some benefits that the team has got again, a detailed presentation of this back, I think, in May, but we've talked about this, and the committee's been aware of this for months now. So some of the instructional benefits of consolidation are actually there too. That there'd actually be balanced classrooms and fewer splits, because right now there's a lot of staff that they're being split across multiple sites sites with smaller enrollments, and so there's a lot of lost instructional time instead of just travel time, if you will. And with that, because people in the consolidated environment would have more full-time staff in those sites, if you will, in many situations, it'd be better collaboration for staff, less travel time, and then, again, improved student access to their teachers. So these are some of the reasons that you see at a kind of a big idea level about why this is being considered by the group. Also back, I think in May, certainly goes back to our spring meetings, our early time in this process, we were getting some information, because at that time it was just like, the committee itself, like, why is this needed? Let's look at like what some of the data is. Again, I'm showing you summaries here again, and for the committee it's a review about, before we get into our meetings, our decisions, our recommendations tonight. But we were looking at tables like this. So what would it be if you didn't close any schools? Or what would it be like if you closed one elementary school of the 9 sites? What if you had 2? What if you had 3? And so and you could see this kind of like what would happen with enrollment in general, sections across schools, the financial benefits, the educational benefits. So what you we're really talking tonight around a lot of this around closing 2, because that's where the conversations pretty consistently have been. And we'll show us in a second. I've kind of been tracking into what's the right amount needed, or what's the appropriate amount, or with balance north to south, all these sorts of things. You'll see that playing out. And this is just a kind of a historical slide, but also a summary slide if you're trying to understand, particularly in the audience or watching it at home, like, why some of these processes and conversations. So going back, this is also another slide tries to show like what's been the development of this over time. So I just talked about April we started, May we started getting more information around this. And one of the things we got in May, you might have participated in a community survey where we were asking people what were some of the valued parts of any kind of consolidation, or what they valued about this process in making decisions. And so that from the community survey, when the preliminary data came in, the committee did a first effort of trying to use that to say what would be some initial schools to maybe start considering with these priorities coming in a preliminary fashion from the community in mind. And you started seeing some of the schools that were seemed like they might be the most pertinent or relevant moves forward. Then in June, we had the final survey data from the community, and then with that in mind, got even a little clearer with some of the schools that maybe seemed like they should be considered for possible consolidation. And then in July, we took not just the community survey information, but also the pertinent policy parameters, school board policy parameters around areas like facility closing or facility use, and et cetera. And between a combination of the survey input from the community, citizens, and then also from the policy itself, those parameters, use that as an updated parameters, as you see at the top. And then you could see the schools that got there. Wherever you see a number, that means when we had table teams come back, again, we see a 3, that means like 3 tables said, yeah, that's one we should consider. And the tables get mixed up monthly if you haven't been tracking this. But again, the idea is that you can start seeing patterns. And so we're just so last time when we were trying to get a kind of a first time of saying, like, where are you individually with this after all these months of processing, members, we were just trying to show, like, to remind people that this is what's been going on and the development of it. So this was what we asked people. This is the individual input we asked. We had people around 3 questions. We thought we might almost have people give input in July, but the input was, can we have one more month to kind of process this, maybe ask us about a few more questions, not just which are the top ones. So we did this, and here's what we found out. So I'm going to take them. So this is all so far been review. Now I want to just talk about what I see. Again, I don't have a vote in this. I say I'm kind of like Switzerland. My role is to be neutral, to try to have a good process to help you make the best decision for your community you can. And so these were the 3 questions that we asked this committee last month to try to refine where they're thinking around consolidation recommendations. And I'm going to take those in reverse order, because question 3 is where I see the most consensus, then question 2 and 1. And I'm always trying to use your consensus where we can find it to help us figure out where we move next. So the third question, but the most important in terms of your consensus from last August, was this: should the district pursue a single school or a paired school solution? And you notice I didn't ask a 3-paired solution in that, because there really had been no traction with any of that over months, so we're not going to ask that. It was really one of the 2. And so we had 21 people here, and what I would say is 93% of those with an opinion support a paired school solution. And I do this quite a bit. I've done this with communities across Wisconsin for years. I rarely see anything 90% or higher. I just want to say that. So I mean, it's just a consensus. It's like a clear consensus here. I just want to make that point. However you look at this, a lot of times people are looking at stuff like this for the first time. This is kind of what I do. So I just want to make that point, contextual. Like I almost never see anything. I think if I can get 60%, I mean, you know, there's, again, if you can have, what's of overwhelming majority in an election is 55% sometimes, you know, or something like that. So they'd have 90-some%. But here's my point I'd like to say for the board is it's clear to me that the will of the group is that there should be a recommendation of not just one school, it should be two. And I think for some of the reasons we just kind of reviewed. And a couple things I note as the kind of guy who thinks and looks at this, I'll note that 100% of the FAC members with regular repeated meeting attendance participated. So we've had 21 people regularly here or repeatedly here, and all the 21 were voting and able to vote last meeting. So that was one of the concerns about July, like that sort of thing. Second note I think I note is the second bullet. So let's just say even if those FAC members were uncertain, like 6, about which way to go, even if they all went to one school, we still would have 62% of you saying 2. So again, it's clearly where you are. I think, and that's just a big if. So again, to me, clearly, I'm just trying to make the point. You're telling me from that last vote, your input is that you have a paired solution in mind. Do you think that's the best way to move forward? So now I'm going to move from that one to the second question, because the second question, then let's look at what you thought, because the second question was this: identify your top 2 paired school solutions to continue discussing for a potential FAC closure recommendation to the school board. And then we gave you the option to mark mark 1 or 2. You just can't do more than 2. And you didn't have to mark. You could mark just 1 if you wanted, or what have you, right? You don't have to use your votes, but you could do up to 2 of these options. And so this is what we saw. So what I want to note on this, so the first thing I note is that there are 21 voters, and I saw 11 had option CB. But I also know that people had 2 votes. So I want to, there's a little bit more to talk about here. So one thing I want to note is that while all 21 participants in this input had up to 2 paired school choices they could vote for, most of you seemed clear about your preferred one, because I noticed that there are only 24 votes of a possible 42. So most of you voted only for one of them. That's what I mean. I'm not looking. I mean, I'm tracking who does what. I mean, again, that's not the point of this. But what I noticed is you had 2 options, but most of you were probably said it's pretty clear to me which is the better of the 4 options. At least last month, because there's 42 votes possible if you do the math. Right, 21 people voted. You all could vote up to twice. Pick 2 of the 4 that you like, and only 24 votes were cast. So most of you picked one, and didn't use your second because you had. Yep, that's the one I think is the right one. I assume is what's in your head. And then others pick 2. So again, that's one thing I noticed. And then a solution including Northwoods continues to show up as a top consideration for this. And again, you could see that also tracking earlier. It was always shown across the months earlier. So then I want to just look at the last question. Again, I'm going backwards order from last meeting we had. So I'm not sure, like this one is around single school options. And because, again, I want to remind you, because I saw such clear consensus here, about 93% felt strongly about a 2-school solution. I don't want to spend too much time on a 1-school solution vote, because I don't think it's really pertinent to the big message you told me. But what I do want to look at this for, I think it's just, is there integrity, does it make sense with the other votes in other areas? I just want to see like we're not missing something. And when I look at this, I noticed, this is the last vote. So identify your top 2 single school solutions to continue discussing. And again, you can see this. And what I note on here are a few things. First, that Northwoods continues to show up as an option for advisory closure here, as it showed up elsewhere. And the second thing I'll notice is that option F is a way of talking about more than 1 school should be closed. So it's another way of talking about that idea of 2 or more, 2 schools. So again, I see it having some consistency to the other votes. Is what I see. And so if you kind of track this now, so we've actually been getting your input in some format. Usually it's been coming from table teams in May, June, July with different kind of inputs, just trying to continue to look at more information, more detail. You can kind of see there's some similar tracking. Now again, there's a lot of alphabets in August, but that alphabets tracks to what I just shared with you. Again, Northwoods, et cetera, and Hinchin and Spence particularly showing up there as one of those options. All right, so here's my summary slide of looking at what you told us through your votes, through your input last month. A paired school option has emerged as a top approach. That's clear. The following 2 school options rose to the top for further FAC consideration from the last time you gave us input. Northwoods and Hinchin or Northwoods and Spence. Those are the ones that popped up. I do believe, because I want to go back one more point I want to make sure I make, is because you had up to 2 votes, and because like this would be like a primary election to me a bit. And because if you could, again, I think it would be I'd like to ask you today about, like, okay, now that you have your top 2 out there, we should probably say, like, tell me what's your preferred one and see where that is, because I'm not sure when I see like CD or CB or CD, like that might be someone's second choice, not the first choice. I'm not sure yet with 4 options, so I think it would make sense in terms of asking you now that you've gotten clear about your top 2, at least as a group, what would be your top 1 if we could, and have a kind of a general election, if you will, to your input to this. That's what I see, but again, the consistency kind of through that over time. I also want to recognize a few things, and this is, again, this group, this committee, we've said this, we want to reiterate this. This committee doesn't make decisions, this committee makes recommendations. Their task is to make advisory recommendations to the duly elected school board in this. So the way we see this process rolling out is kind of what you see here. The FAC is ultimately tasked to make recommendations. We have 8 meetings scheduled. This is the 6th of 8. We think by November, early November is our goal to have a report with advisory recommendations on these things in a final form. Then administration will need to do some updates around long-range facility plans. And then ultimately the school board would determine that the consolidation, their role as duly elected members in areas like this. We've also been talking about more generally about for the past couple months, there will be opportunity for community input. Like today is really a work meeting for the committee. Again, very glad that people are engaging and present and observing. The opportunities for input are always at board meetings. There's always public comment there. But particularly around this issue, November 27th and November 29th, now I can share that those dates weren't determined earlier. But the 27th idea is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Engels, that would be an opportunity at like 6 p.m. virtual opportunity. 29th would be in-person opportunity. It's at 6 o'clock. Kind of the parameters, you can sign up ahead of time, 5-minute parameters, all the things that are typical parts of the board process, the community process. But again, know those are opportunities to provide input into this before a board makes decision about these recommendations and the things. So that's kind of the process here too, as we're reviewing this. So again, one of my real practical things I'd like to see from the group tonight is to see if you could give your input as a group and see if there's consensus about a preferred option. These seem to be the top 2. I also want to say that you got new information tonight around busing costs, maintenance costs, what have you. So again, so maybe we'll definitely have some conversation about this. But if we can get refined around a preferred option, a pairing option, I'd like to have that if we could, and see if we're ready for that tonight. But again, the consensus of the group is what's going to drive that, as it always has. Steve, I see a question. I'm going to get there with the mic. Or Dr. Engel, that'd be great. And I'll work this side of the room if there's others.
I apologize for weighing in again, but I'm wondering for the members on the committee together if the new information on slide 11 impacts your decision on the pairing. It did me because I was recognizing that, and that's why I asked for staff to add that. So whether this is the right solution or not, I'm not suggesting you have to have a revote, but I just raised the question because, again, for the school board and administration, avoidance of long-term maintenance costs is a huge impact to the community and takes us down a different path. So again, apologize for weighing in so long.
Why don't you I'm going to give it to Joan next, and then we'll keep going down with Michelle. Joan?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Steve said, because my understanding was that we're still missing a lot of information, or at least that was the general feel of the committee at the last meeting, and that once that information was presented to us, that these pairings, these options would all be back on the table to narrow it down once we felt like we had the information that we needed.
Thank you.
The other
Michelle?
thing that I was thinking is that we had voted in that choice F has kind of left the table, which I think when we look at
I'll go back to it.
okay, choice F was to
Right there.
replace
Yep.
multi-schools, right? So looking at, I guess I'm not really comfortable on the last two options without that long-term plan and looking ahead to like, how do we address then the need for a new building for Emerson and Spence to avoid $6.3 million if only Northwoods and Spence or Hinchin and Northwoods are the two that we're voting on.
So appreciate that, and I want to speak to that too. Anyone else on this before I kind of, was there one more? I thought I saw one more hand. Okay, thank you. So I'll just tell you my thinking, and then again, the committee will do what the committee wants to do here. But I also want to make sure that I get a sense of where, if the committee wants to reopen this, I guess that'd be part of this. So in fair, that's my first question, because I'm not sure. So I appreciate the perspective and the comment. But we'd ask, because I think right now I would say the committee did share to me like 93% went a two-paired solution, and so then we go down that way, and then we'll revisit things. But let me just say first to this one that Michelle asked. Thought about this pretty long and hard too about F, and I'll just share my take on it. Is again, what I would go back to is this is again the idea of a two-paired solution. The idea of this having a paired or two-school solution was so clear. So I really wanted to look at particularly what you thought around these items and the ones that were in play. Now, F is a kind of interesting hybrid, isn't it? Because the multiple school and multiple phase thing. So that's, again, I was wondering about that too. And ultimately, what I noted here is, again, is people had 2 votes on this one as well. I didn't go into that detail. Remember, this is when people just have 1 vote. They had 2 votes. And I noticed 8 out of 21, so 38% from memory, 38% chose that. So it doesn't. Again, it was certainly notable, but it was a minority of folks in an area where only one person thought a one school solution here should work. So that was my reason why not including it. But again, that's a fair thing to ask the group if you feel different. I'm just telling you my thinking on it. Yeah, Bill, you're next.
On the page back on 19. On the page back on 19, you don't have any of it on or any of the other pages where you have Northwoods and Emerson. Is there a certain reason on that?
They're both.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've thought about in this process is we kind of have a north and a south track for our middle schools and high schools, and and from my perspective at least, as we're thinking about consolidating elementary schools, we want to keep kids together and families together as they travel through our system. That's been a real challenge historically when we've had overlapping boundaries that split kids, lots of angst over all of that. And so, if the boundaries Ferry Street, keeping kids together as they move into middle school and high school, could be a benefit to the school district. Whereas if we close 2 schools on the north side, you would be, it would create a lot of complication around that. And that's something that can be explored. It hadn't come up in kind of other interest in this group, but it's certainly.
Yeah, and I would go back to one of the things that came up is like back to June even, and kind of starting getting some nods in our June meeting, like a north and a south. Like it was before it was even like which schools, the idea of like a north school and a south school paired was part of besides the financial and educational benefits, also the kind of community-minded benefit of that, if you will. That was part of what also was kind of evolving. I think that led to that bill. Paisley.
Okay, this is a bit of a journey, so I hope everyone can come along with me here. So the North Side School is the newest elementary school in the district. Southern Bluffs and Northwoods are tied for the second newest school in the district. So to me already doesn't make sense to close Northwoods. The location and the busing keeps getting pointed to over and over and over. I think busing is unpredictable. We can do whatever we do. People can opt out of the schools, and again, we're dealing with busing. So when you're closing a location purely based on the location and the busing, I don't think that's a great choice. Also, the location was chosen because of the green space and the woods and everything else, and you're not going to get that in the middle of the city. You're just not. So it's a beautiful location We've got, all the windows. My kids all go there, full disclosure. My kids have all gone to Northwoods. So you may say I'm biased, I probably am, but also I know the school. I've been there a million times. Beautiful large windows. For those of you that went on the tour, you saw big classrooms. The music room is the envy of all the elementary schools. So my concern, beyond being a parent with kids at the school, is that ultimately our responsibility is to the taxpayers. So we have to prove that this is the best option. And this, to me, is not the best option. You're looking at 2 schools that, from the previous slide, $6.3 million in savings if we close those 2 schools. And yes, we'll have the additional savings of, $48 million or whatever from the staffing regardless, but $6 million is a lot of money. It's not nothing. And I do think F is also an option that eventually, maybe you close those 2 and then you build a school on probably the bigger of those 2, and then maybe in the future you close a different one. Again, that's depending on a referendum, so depending how that works. But that would be logical. And of course, people are going to have feelings about their schools, but that's the logical choice where the school board can then say, this is why we chose this. And we can all say, this is why we chose this when people ask. Because when people are asking me right now, why are you looking at Northwoods? I don't have an answer to that. Because to me, it doesn't make sense. Beyond that, the international school, the IB program, my husband is from a different country, and once we heard about the international school from a friend of ours, there wasn't another choice for us. This is our community. So we keep talking about community as proximity to your house. That's not the only community. If this is a choice, sorry, they're back here. If this is a choice that I can opt into this community because those are like-minded people, the focus of the education is that international piece, and that's important to our family, we can make that choice. So that is another thing to think about, that this is another community. It's not just because it's close to my house. Also, I've heard that there's this option of possibly, picking up the entire school and moving it elsewhere. That seems silly, to take kids out of one of the newer schools and move it elsewhere when we have schools that, particularly one school, that needs to be replaced. The building needs to be replaced within the next 1 to 20 years. It just doesn't logically make sense to me. One of the district's parameters was the collaborative alignment with community resources. That's the only negative for Northwoods. Otherwise, there's really nothing else. And Northwoods has the longest future lifespan of the 4 that we're considering. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Paisley. Other input on this before I kind of think about how we might move forward with this, the input I'm hearing? Okay, so I think I was just making some notes so I wouldn't lose my thoughts, so that's why I was over here, Paisley. I was listening, I was also trying to capture this. I think the question for the group would be, because we continue to get more information, and that's fair. So again, I still think people are thinking a paired solution. I think that's pretty, like I said, very clear. So I think the question for the group, and this is kind of Steve, Joe, and others too, maybe. His first question I would just ask is, with information that you just saw earlier about transportation and maintenance, would you want to revisit the vote on this? That's the first question. I want to ask the question to the group, do you want to reopen the vote? Because again, I see right now that was so clear. So when I say that we work with consensus, I just want to be really clear about this. Like, I don't know what you all think, and that until we get your input. I want to honor the process. So since there's new information, some are saying, hey, I think we should at least consider that. My first question would be, I'm just going to tell you what's in my head so you kind of know how I'm thinking through this. So the first question would be like, so do you want to reopen this? Because if you do, then I think then we have to talk about how we do that. And if we do, then maybe it'll look more than just like these 2 that we're trying to get narrowed down. So that's the first question I want to ask. What I probably would want to ask, if you do want to do that, in fairness to what Michelle just asked, I might say, well, okay, I get your point. Maybe I try to share like why I didn't include F on here, and maybe that makes sense for you or not. But again, I want to say, so if you're going to reopen this, do you want F on this as well? So you have 5 options on there to talk about with narrowing. And if so, then we probably have to do a way of thinking like get narrowed, and maybe we narrow one more time. We'll see what it is. But I think that would be a way to process forward. It isn't like starting all over, but it's just a matter of you have that. And if we did do that, we might need a little time like to process or talk about, like you just heard Paisley say, here's why I think this. Some others might want to take a point and say, well, here's why I'm thinking this instead. And you might need to have that process time. And that's all fair in how this committee works. So we get a sense, remember we go back to our norms. So our norms go back to the idea of different perspectives on a given topic at hand, have an opportunity to be heard. And then once we have those different perspectives heard, then we see where the will of the group is. In this case, do you want to vote in again or not? So that's what I would say, and I don't think that's backtrack. And I think that's just fair processing, and that's kind of just how it naturally. I think there's integrity to that. It's got integrity to our norms. So what I'm not saying right now is, yep, let's revote. What I'm going to ask you in a moment is like, do you want to re-up this given some new information today? So I'm seeing a lot of nods, but if you want to, do you want to reopen? I mean, can we ask it and just raising hands would be the quickest way? Okay. All right. So that's pretty easy. So we could revisit this. I think we're going to need to talk about it a little bit too, just so you know. I'm not going to say, okay, great, now let's vote. Okay, we won't do it that way. So then again, I want to ask the second question then. And so you heard Michelle make the point about F. Again, and I told you why I didn't put it up there because 38% had it on an area around one vote. So I don't know, but again, maybe that's something you consider differently now. So the second question I would have is if you'd have F be part of what you're trying to narrow within a two-school approach. Do we need to talk about that, or anyone have an opinion on that before we vote? Michelle, you had a chance already. You want one more thing?
I do want to talk some more. So I don't see F as it's either that or F. I think it's that and F, because if you go back to slide 11, that looks at cost avoidance. So the option of, like, you could essentially, and I've been told this is aggressive, I would like to say maybe planning forward, but if you look at closing 4 buildings and rebuilding 2 or 1, right, then our cost avoidance could be potentially $7.9 million. Can you
explain that further?
Sure. So when looking at Northwoods and Hinchin on that first line, right, that to me looks like a little Band-Aid. Emerson and Spence looks more like a gaping wound. So when you take and close all 4 but build 2 on those sites, then that avoidance would be 7.9 million. I'm adding those 2 lines together.
And how do you pay for the new schools? And how do you pay for the new schools?
So the question was, how do you pay for those new schools, right? And that goes back to our vote, right? Like when we look at if you're closing buildings, to have capital referendum, or you'd need a capital referendum in order to, so that's why it needs to be an and with that, it has to be a long-range plan. So we have a short-term goal of closing 2 buildings with a long-term goal of closing 2 more buildings, but replacing them.
I think the most important line on this table or this page is the one on the right on the top, because that's taking the 20-year deferred maintenance. To the right, that one right there. That's to me the one that makes the most sense, because you need to take a look at the operating expenses that the busing creates, which is an every year cost. The maintenance that, even though there's a bigger bang in some of these schools, it's a one-time cost. Once it's avoided, it's avoided. But if you have ongoing costs, that really changes the total impact, financial impact to the school district. And I do think that we need to consider what is the potential reuse of some of these sites. There's certainly a lot more acreage in some of them. But I just wanted to make sure that at least in my mind, and unless I'm not seeing this correctly, but to me that top right is the financial impact, the one that has the most weight.
Over by
I promise it's not a speech this time. I was just going to say that we do have the success story of the Northside School, where we closed Franklin and Roosevelt and then made the beautiful new Northside School. So I think we could do that on the South Side as well. Close 2 of the South Side schools and then build a new school on one of those properties.
Thank you. So hearing Michelle, what you said there, I'm wondering about, what I'm wondering about is, there's clarity around, like, let's get some, okay, so Taylor, I won't say it yet. Please, go ahead, yep.
So if we close 2 schools or more, whatever, and the plan is to rebuild, what's the time frame for rebuilding, realistically? I mean, we keep talking about it, but we also know that annually this is draining us. Realistically, what is it to build a new school in regards to time frame?
From my perspective, kind of like financially, politically, number of different factors, probably the soonest to go to referendum for a new building would be 2026, given where our debt's at, where it would fall off to make it the most attractive as possible. So that would probably be the soonest. And then it kind of depends on how big you want to go. We know we can do, with a drop in debt, we could probably do about $20 million for a no mill rate increase. Every $10 million after that's about 17 cents. If you're talking by then a $40 million building, if it's not bigger than our current ones, 34 or 40 cents on the mill rate, depending on what property values do over that time. So that's kind of a little bit of context. That's a lot of information in like this, but that would be the soonest. Building completion, 2 years. In there, so the soonest is probably 4 years to completion of a new building at this point, if I'm trying to be as successful as possible. Then you would be looking at, renewing our operating referendum so we can run our schools on a daily basis, and then probably a couple years later, you could start to think about another elementary school realistically if the debt's, measured properly over time. 4 years to the first elementary rebuild would be the soonest, and probably 8 years to the second one, on the depending on the taxpayers' will, right?
Yeah.
Like they could say, no, we want a $1 on the mill rate, we're going to go for it. We're going to do 3 elementary schools, it's going to be awesome. That's a optimistic future as well, but we don't want to negatively impact our taxpayers where we can. Taxes are already higher in La Crosse and surrounding areas, and we got to be sensitive to that. So.
And very speculative, of course, to that, right? But that's
Very
part of the
speculative.
challenge, and that's and I hear that too when I've heard people talk at tables, what have you. So, Michelle, with what you're saying, I'm wondering about getting, because you're making the point like any of these schools could be a multi-school, multi-phase thing. So I'm thinking like, let's get clarity about these 4, and we can talk about the F thing perhaps, because I don't know how you work through that as an option. Unless you just say people are interested in that option at all. And so again, I don't know what quite fits in this group or not. That's what I'm not sure about. Maybe you can help me with that. But that's how it seems like that's very complicated, where you could figure out what options make sense. Now, you're talking with each other right now. So again, if you want to talk about it, I'd rather you talk, because I'm trying to get clarification about this. And Joan, you're next, but let me do that. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say that I do think part of the process is understanding, like, so once we come up with whatever we come up with, what opportunity will there be for us to give the explanation of why we came up with that reason? Because I agree that it might seem like a really good idea to close, these 2 schools knowing they're never coming back. But if there was a third option of closing this school knowing that something else would be back in that location or within, a mile radius of it, that could in theory impact a decision. So I don't necessarily disagree that we pick between what, the 4 options that are up there, but I do think at some point that at least has to be part of the conversation, or like the clarifier of why we picked these schools.
Fair enough. Thank you. Michelle?
And I think with that, I don't know if we would be able to decide which one this is. It would have to be like 2 votes, right? Like you have like this option, and do you agree? Yes, we should look at a long-term range. It sounds like 4 to 10 years in order to do an option F. And how would that impact this vote, right? So like if you're looking at a lower costing one, but I think we do owe it to the Board of Education to bring a proposal forward that looks at short-term goals and long-term goals so that they have kind of an insight of like, well, why did you pick these two schools and then stop? Like, we chose these two schools for the short-term savings, and then we chose these other schools to replace for the long-term savings.
Other comments on this? So thank you. Kathy?
I'm just wondering that when they close a school, if the school district, excuse me, if the school district would sell the property off, where that money would go? Would it go into the maintenance, or would it go into a fund for building a new school?
Generally goes into a fund set aside for property acquisition and development in the future. And so when we sold the Roosevelt property, it went into a fund that was set aside for future needs of a similar nature. We try and keep like money with like money.
So you all have the slides. You have copies of the slides, right, before you? So some of the information that came up, like the tables, we talked about some of the busing shifts, the things we presented here, but you have it there if you want to review that. Again, I want to ask you all, because again, this is your group, but again, I want to find that spot of, again, being responsive and not getting lost in this too. So I want to just say that, so I'm definitely seeing that we want to reopen this. And maybe with new information, maybe I have a different vote. What I'm hearing is, you tell me, like, is it just these four in my first ask, or is it these four plus F? And you gotta let me know, because I'm not getting a vote, and we just talked about it for like 10 minutes. F is separate. Okay, so we're just gonna get input on these four. Well, that's not.
But like, okay, so I think the first vote would be these four. And then the second question is, do we want to look at F or a long-range plan? Okay, I'm handing mine.
But if we don't have F, that changes my vote for these. That's what I'm saying. Like, so if we vote on this and there is no F,
Do you want to do F first?
I think we need to know if there's a long-term plan or if it's short-term.
Okay, so if we I guess we put F in here, and then we'll see where people are. Do you have Dr. Engel? Did you have a thought on that?
I would just say, like, no matter what, we're going to have to think about maintenance and replacing our buildings. Whether this group simply chooses to like identify buildings that are on a short list for consideration of closure, like, our good stewardship will say, like, we got to think about replacing stuff at some point. Going to referendum's a huge, big thing. The timing, all of that's a lot. Socio-political impacts of all of that, that's a school board's decision. I think you can say, hey, you need to think about replacing your buildings too. I think there's plenty of room for that, and you could even say, like, hey, these are the ones we think are the most important to replace. I don't know that you need to go down specifying a lot of that if you don't want to. That said, if you need, as a group, to say, you must also think about replacing your buildings, that's a great additional recommendation, and here's some thoughts we have where you should start thinking about because we think it's most important. I don't think it precludes a decision about this personally. You could close two and then replace. It would demonstrate lots of things to the community, depending on how you view it. So I would just throw that out there from my perspective. Good stewardship of our resources will involve ongoing maintenance and replacement at some point.
Carl's next.
I think the point of doing the two votes is that we see how many people it changes, and that's the purpose of it. So we take the F option off and we see how we vote. And then we add the F option. And the purpose of adding it is to see how many people's opinions change on the options.
And to echo that, unless Michelle or someone has a specific description of what F would be, which schools to close and which to replace, it's hard for me to even understand exactly what you're advocating. And I'm not being disrespectful. It's just hard to know because it's so open-ended. Plus, with what Dr. Engel has said, that's 2 to 4 years out, I'm going to suggest that one of the things that comes out of this committee is after we make whatever recommendations, this school board and this community is going to have to revisit all of these closure decisions over time, because the way enrollment's going, this issue is not going to just happen this year. This is going to continue to happen with the secondary schools and elementary schools. This is not a one time and we're done. I believe over the next 5 to 10 years, this same kind of issue of closing other schools is going to have to come up.
I think part of the confusion or the complexity comes from some of the information is related to the geographical area and some of the information is related to the buildings, which it has to be. So one way to think about this really complex problem for our community is thinking about if we agree that closing 2 schools makes sense for where our district is right now, what are the best places to have schools into the future? Of course, there's a lot you can't predict, but the place is more consistent over time than the building. So I think part of what we're dancing around is the complexity of how the place and the building intersect. I didn't help.
So this is, again, just trying to process this and thinking through and being respectful to comments and then just trying to be helpful to the group. So I think the challenge a little bit with is that these are specified a bit. F could be lots of things, and respectfully. And so, again, I think I'd like to ask what you want to do, but I would like to probably recommend you get your input around these 4 first, and then we see where that stands. And then with part of F, a little bit is a wondering for me, and I'm not on the board, I'm not the administration here, is we start working into possibilities that might be on scope, that might be not quite determined. I mean, so again, you can get into, like, these are pretty clear, like what you have in mind as a next step. And then you can also make, like, we think also beyond these initial moves, there needs to be a long-term plan that might include X, Y, and Z, or might include, so that's a different level of, again, and you could say, like, as a consensus, we believe that. Part of that's beyond our scope and part of our, the details of the time we have, et cetera. So I still, if that's still a concern, you can still weigh in on that. And maybe you'll love F right now, but I think that's partly also the challenge. So I'm just trying to, before you, like, that's also a way I see committees like you working through something like this, where they're not all apples and or oranges. There's some things like F, which is a little bit more of a nuance, if you will, around this. So Courtney next, and Michelle, and then I do want to move forward because we got other stuff we got to do here. Okay.
I think just to add on to what Nell was saying, I think part of the challenge that we're facing is we may all have ideas about how we would vote on these options, whether there's F or not F. But what we're lacking is the opportunity to have discourse about why. And so it's interesting to hear Paisley speak about her feelings, but I haven't heard that from most others in this room. And while we might all be rooted in a decision right now, without that discourse, I'm afraid that it may not be authentic consensus. So I don't know what it looks like to get to that next place, but I think that might be what's happening here, is we need to hear each other and we might change our minds.
Yeah. So the way that can sound is, particularly in a chance to weigh in, just say, like, okay, and we could take time quickly to do that. Usually not everyone feels like they need to speak, but might say, like, I'd like to advocate for X, Y. I mean, I'm just making one up, and here's why. And someone else may, I hear that, because that's a perspective, that goes with our norms. Different perspectives on a given topic. Like, the topic at hand right now is around the difficult recommendation around a closing option or recommendation. This is what I prefer. So we hear that. We've heard from several. I could say that quickly and do that, and that's partly where you might influence one another. I think, Courtney, that's the way I see it play out at times. And it doesn't have to take all that long, because a lot of you already been thinking about this and talking about it. Michelle, go ahead.
Okay, so when I look at all 4 schools that are up there, right, the reason that, and this is full transparency for my vote here, when I look at a short-term goal, like when we toured Hinchin and Northwoods and Emerson and Spence, right, looking around, when I looked at Hinchin and they have multi sections that are split classrooms and they have low class sizes and all of those things that look really great. the hard part about that then as a teacher, like doing split classrooms, and there's some other pieces that go along with that, it's hard. So if I look at short-term pieces, Hinchin and Northwoods is like you could pretty easily close those two buildings and with pretty least disruptive. Like there's 212 students at Hinchin and 3 surrounding elementary schools that they could go to. Same with Northwoods with pretty low impact. I think our next slides here talk about SES status and different pieces like that. When we look at the brick and mortar of a building, Emerson and Spence have the biggest cost. The biggest cost in maintenance and those capital costs. So my vote changes if F is on the table or off the table. Right now, F is off the table because, like Dr. Engel said, it's going to take multiple years and a capital referendum to accomplish. So I understand that F isn't necessarily like on the table for a vote tonight. However, when looking at these pieces, it does change my vote if that is an option or not an option. Because if we're looking at capital costs or operating costs and what that maintenance is, then it changes depending upon what we do moving forward.
Thank you, Michelle. What Courtney shared was, again, before we ask you to vote, before you actually get your input here, would anybody want to advocate briefly for why I think this? Again, you would have the opportunity if you want to do that. We've heard from several of you about this. At the same time, some people, I know what I want, and I don't feel the need to do that. So that's how it could play out, and where people have done that in the past. Somebody want to do that? This would be an opportunity. Otherwise, I'm going to call the question.
So both of my children went to Northside, and they had the benefit of a brand new school. I attended Franklin, and I attended Jefferson, which are neither existing anymore as schools in the La Crosse School District. I think, I've never been to Northwoods, I missed the tours, but being a newer school, it honestly, to me, doesn't make sense to close that one. I understand the busing, but looking at the charts here, the money for adding new bus routes would be absorbed by how much savings for the deferred maintenance and the operating costs if you closed Emerson and Spence. And I really strongly feel that Northwoods has a lot to offer that you're not going to get right in town. And again, I've never toured it. I don't know how it's laid out, but I have been inside Spence. I've been inside Hinchin during summer school programs, and they're old. They need to go. It'd be replaced somehow. I like the idea of building 2 schools together on the south side. Maybe down the road, that would be Spence and Hinchin on the Spence location. But I really can't see taking a school that's newer and keeping one that needs so much in repairs.
Thank you. Anyone else? No.
I would just like to say that I do find the arguments around the geography of the schools especially compelling. I think the way I was interpreting what Dr. Engel was saying is that essentially F is on the table because this is a continuous plan that always has to be under evaluation by the staff and the school board. So I think F is on I'm hearing that whether or not we discuss what F is, that F is a thing that will always be part of the conversation about what comes next. So when I think about our community from a higher level and what makes sense, the geographical and like demographic where the people are arguments make sense. And that's what I'll say.
Okay, so I want to, just got louder. Okay, so with the options up on the board, are you ready to give me your input around your preferred option? Raise your hand if you're ready to give me, I'm telling you which it is, are you ready to give me your preferred option? One option. That's what I'm asking first off, okay? Okay, so again, is there anything else to say about that before we do? What's this? Okay, thank you. So what you have here is the little ballots, if you will. Let me see where we are, your input sheets. You gotta need a mic if you're gonna ask a question. You're in a public meeting. Attention to Bill, please. Quiet, please.
If 5 years from now, La Crosse got a lot of money to build a new school, and they built it right over here at, right out in the field, right out back here at Hogan. And if there was no Emerson, would all those students come over to here, over to Hogan? And they got rid of this building we're in right now and maybe put the administration in a certain section over there and a certain section over there where they're grouped all together, like in booking and we'll say maintenance. They can be at a different school because we know all the schools are really big and we got a lot of room in there. We don't have any kids.
Could you
But we
repeat
got all the administration here.
Could you repeat the first part of that? I was on pen duty for a moment.
I forgot. What was that?
The first part, close.
If they closed Emerson and 5 years from now we got money to build a new school and we built it right out here right out in the playground back here, then after that's built, we tore this building down and we make this a nice green space for the kids to play. Would the Emerson kids and the Northwoods kids or whatever be over into this? Would this be considered north side, south side, middle side?
North side is a technical definition, but
I know what it is, but
this location is south of Ferry Street, which is our current north-south boundary.
pretend there's not a Ferry Street.
We redraw Ferry Street, so
There
then
you go.
it is whatever you want it to be. Like we can
I mean,
draw
you
the
can't get any
boundaries.
more middle than this place, can you?
This is as central as it gets. The center of our city geographically is 21st and something. It's right over there.
You probably didn't hear that. Do the administrations, and I'm sure I'm pissing a lot of people off, but do we need them all in the same building? If we got lots of room in other buildings, we can send accounting over there. We can, like, we're going to send some to Central. Can some go to Logan? Can some go to whatever schools we got? We all have, I think they use email, and they can talk to people.
Yep, we've done the remote work thing, so that is possible. There is some efficiency when you can walk across the hall and talk to somebody about an issue, but we can certainly distribute some of those services. Absolutely, the savings of this, the closure comes from putting elementary staff together, not necessarily administrative staff. And I'll just throw out one other thing. When we went to go sell the Lincoln Middle School, it was put on the historic register, and so we're kind of stuck with what that means. This building will be on the historic register if we try and do anything with it, based on our reading of the Heritage Preservation Commission, so we're kind of stuck with this building envelope as it is. There's not really any getting rid of it. So that's just something to consider as we currently read the situation.
So thank you. I'll collect your ballots, and then I will. When you're ready, I'll take it. Then let's take a 5-6 minute break till we get that tallied up and see where people are. You can bring them right to me, please, or Kelly. Thank you. All right, well, come on back, please. Come grab your seats, please. We'll get started again. Okay, please have your seats. We're going to continue with our meeting. Lend me your ears, please. Thank you so much. All right, so, it's interesting working through complex issues and things like this because, again, sometimes it gets fluid. So, again, a bit here. So this is what, again, the feedback on this last week. And then again, you can see the results here, what they are. I hope you can see it wherever you're sitting. And so there are some different inputs here based on maybe updated information on what you're thinking tonight. Some of the comments shared. So, one of the things that I want to do is give you a little chance to process this. I have a couple comments myself about what I see. But then I also want to keep us moving in our agenda. And again, I was thinking maybe we'd have some, again, I was wondering again if I said tonight, do we have some more clarity about recommended options within a pairing? I don't know that we have that right now, would be my first comment. I think a shorter list, but is there a recommended option? I don't know that I see that at this point. So that's my first observation. But I do still see the clear sense of a pairing and then there's a short list. And again, this is, I'm not going to force a consensus from this group. I also know, but there's already some level of sense about a paired option. There's the shorter list than the original. Again, maybe we revisit this again some more next time. But that's my first thought, is that certainly you can see some differences here as you go. Does anybody have any comments to share as you look at this?
Exactly. We had 24 people vote the first time, and now we've only got 15. So that's also one of the big shifts that's going on. And even if we can't come up with a solid consensus across the group, the fact of saying that 2 schools probably have to close, one on the north side, one on the south side, may be a significant enough guidance to the sense of this group for the school board, who's going to have to make the ultimate decision anyway. I know that's radical to not come to a final recommendation, but we're missing 9 people that were here on the 14th, so we're not even getting a true representation of what that group voted on the first time.
Thank you, Steve. Michelle?
So while I understand we're honoring transparency and having a whole plethora of folks, there may be some voices in the crowd, probably not mine, but that are not open in sharing what they want to about this. And when we look at kind of where we are in voting, it might be advantageous to have, when we have 24 folks together, to discuss openly about these options and then kind of come back to more of a consensus versus being across the board again. So I suggest a closed session.
I know that's an option, and by law. I'll just say that. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not, but that's, again, this is an open forum. Part of the whole expectation is people speak what you're thinking and do your best with that. Was there anything else that anybody had to share? Okay, so again, what we found helpful last time is we gave, there'll be some more questions that come up perhaps. You actually have done a very thoughtful job. You really have done a thoughtful job, and it's been helpful to get your questions, which give you information that help you think through what you're thinking is the best move. So again, I want to encourage you to one of the mechanisms that you use quite a bit is, and we saw him use it, is like, here's some questions I have here. Can I have a clarifier around this, whatever? So maybe that's something now as you heard something tonight or as you're seeing results here that would be helpful to hear that. And then, I'm just talking about options because again, I'm a bit surprised tonight. I'll just be honest with you. But again, I'm not so surprised because sometimes this happens in these processes. But what I just say is it's been helpful to give some feedback to you ahead of time and then let you think about it and come back again. And then that actually helped us. If you remember back in July, we got kind of, I would say people weren't ready yet. They had information. I need some time to process it. We also, I think because of vacations or something, we had a lighter attendance. So that was part of can we just have some time to think before we get input tonight? We have some questions. Let's get that information. We kind of sent you some stuff out ahead of time to ask you to review that. So maybe, I don't know, or maybe it's across the board. To what Steve said, there's already progress on this. Again, when I first came, the idea of 2 schools in the north-south, I have heard that pretty clear. There's a shorter list than an original list. So again, this might be where we are, and it also might be there's one more shot here yet or something to kind of see. Is there, if we had a chance to think about it, talk about it, maybe one more time, and also get as far as we can without forcing it. Again, it's got to be what there's a consensus from the group. Again, I want to honor the norms that we've had, and we'll just respect that. So that's kind of where I am right now at this point in time. And I think because of this and I see your hand, but we'll get there in a second. I do want to make sure we have time for the secondary facilities budget piece tonight for sure and get your input. So we got that today. We're going to look for your input or questions you have on this. That's kind of my moment, just trying to be real with you on that, what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking. And then that's how I look at us coming back to talk about it one more time next time around and see if there's more consensus or not. That's kind of where it is, and we're gonna figure it out. And again, be here. And I mean, you're here. Please be here again. We'll hopefully have the fuller group here next time as well, and get a chance to see the same information and see what, again, the larger group hopefully can weigh in. Bill, you had a comment or question?
Just one thing, just something to ponder on. Not that I want to reinvent the wheel or anything, but I wonder what the voting would have been if we just knew what all the financials were, and we didn't know which schools they were. You know, we knew what it was going to cost for maintenance, and we didn't know if it was Jefferson, which is odd, but any of this, if we didn't know any of the schools, and we just knew their maintenance costs and their budgets and stuff like that, how everybody would have voted.
I promise, Bill, that am I on? Okay. I promise that I was already going to say this, so it is not a direct response to you. But spreadsheets are not humans. They are not people. They are not culture. They are not community. I have pretty deep concerns about how much emphasis is being placed on deferred maintenance, as those are one-time expenditures versus estimated annual savings, which when you look at estimated annual savings is in the big picture of our budget, pennies. And so our decisions.
I'm looking at you point at something. So I think
yeah.
just
If
so
we're
people
looking
are
at
clear,
table clarification from last meeting,
that one.
deferred maintenance avoided is a one-time expenditure, not an annual expenditure. So the most important, as Carl said earlier to me, is estimated annual savings. That's each and every year we save. And those numbers in the big scheme of things are very similar. They are not far off from one another. And therefore, it makes the most sense for our decisions to be based on people and culture and geography and community and the program offerings that we have. So I can't walk away from this meeting without having said that I am shocked at the numbers on those posters, and I just had to say what I'm saying. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, anything else before we move on to the secondary? All right. So again, I assume we're going to be, again, we'll have a planning team meeting like we always do. We have a couple of them between each session. Please give us any questions or comments like you typically do. That's very helpful for us to prepare for the next meeting, to get a sense of where the group is ultimately. And stay tuned. We'll certainly be in touch before the next meeting in preparation for that one in October. All right. So let's do, I think because of time and because of where this, just where things developed here tonight, I want to get us to this actually. So into the secondary facility options, just because of the task we're balancing, I think we'll actually get, I don't want to go further into boundary options when we're unclear about what options we're thinking about. So I just think I don't want to waste your time tonight, and we also have to catch up a little time because that took a little bit longer than originally anticipated. So that's fair enough. We're going to move on to the third option, if you will, tonight. So with that, I'm going to invite Mr. Joe Lavina, who's the Director of Buildings and Grounds, and Mr. Clint Selly, who is, again, an architect for Bray Architects, to give us further information. So how about a hand for them too, please?
Where is the...
He bent down. I know Clint's here somewhere, right? We'll take a minute to get him swapped over. All right, here you go.
To change the slides.
Oh, here you go.
Okay. Well, just to have a show of hands, how many of you are ready to transition to a new topic? So, we're going to talk about the secondary options, and just a reminder, I'm going to give, what I'm going to do is kind of go through, kind of talk about what we talked about last week, just kind of refresh your memory. And then what we will do is then Clint will go over budgetary items and what those cost. Really looking at, are we going to make any recommendations in the secondary level and what kind of priorities they would be. And so they can be none, they can be all, they can be some as we walk through there. So to talk in terms of secondary options at the middle school level, if you remember, we looked at the cafeteria commons, gym addition. We talked about that because at both middle schools, we have a gym that doubles as a cafeteria. And so we looked at those options. We saw what that could look like around the state. We saw what that looked like in our own facilities. Tech ed addition and renovation. If you recall, at the middle school level, tech ed classroom at Logan Middle School was inside a classroom, a single classroom that we fit that into. At Longfellow Middle School, it is in the basement. In the corner of the basement is where their tech ed shop is located. So not really conducive to getting equipment in and out of there, not conducive to the type of facilities we'd like to see. We looked at learning environment, and we looked at hallways, we looked at classrooms, science rooms, and we showed pictures of what we have in our facilities and then potential what was around the state. And then music department addition and renovation, primarily at Logan Middle School, moving the middle school, at Logan Middle School, moving the orchestra and music down to the first floor. Traditionally, you'd want to have that where you have an auditorium or a performance space. And at Logan Middle School is up on the top floor. And then performing arts addition and renovation. If you recall, at Logan Middle, we have a great space that's been there since 1939, but a really nice space, has a lot of potential. At Longfellow, we took that space out, that performing arts space out, and we put in a LMC. And so if we're going to have those same types of facilities at both places, do we want to have that, and do we want to invest in the middle school? If we look at the high school options, we looked at the cafeteria commons, add seating capacity at Logan High School. If you recall, we showed you the area at Logan High School. It's vastly undersized with the kitchen and the commons and the cafeteria space. Tech ed addition and renovation at both schools. At Central, if you recall, it's in the center in the back of the building, so you have to go all the way through the building to access any of the tech ed space. At Logan, it's a better location, but probably inadequate space. We talk about the CAD and the auto space. We really don't have an auto program at the high schools. We have no lifts. We call it an auto program, but we have no lifts and those types of facilities. And then looking at performing arts spaces, we have a space at Central that has a lot of potential. At Logan High School, we have a auditorium that seats about 200 people. So again, very undersized. And so are we going to invest in a space at Logan Middle School that would serve both the high school and the middle school? Or are we going to invest at Logan High School because we have those facilities at Central? And then the planetarium space, Central has that, Logan High School does not. And then Logan has aquatics and a pool. But as I told you, that pool vessel, we cannot use it for competition sizes, so the vessel needs to be replaced. So do we replace that? Do we build new, or do we get rid of that altogether? And then outdoor athletic space. Big difference at both facilities, but when you look at Central, we don't have a turf field. We do at Logan High School. In both places, we have to replace the seating at the athletic complex. And then when you look in terms of the track, at Central we have a 9-lane track, at Logan we do not. And so do we have the same types of facilities at both places? So those are all the things that we talked about last month and we looked at. And so what we asked Clint to do is kind of put some budget numbers to those things so that you could make some decisions on what your recommendation would be to the board.
All right, now, so we might want to go back to the other topic once we see these numbers, but again, what we're trying to do is project each of these as more or less a standalone project. Again, not knowing exactly what we're going to be doing. There is, I'll say, quite a bit of duplication that is occurring right now. So for example, we're showing all of the middle school projects at each of the areas. We tried to break them out. We tried to provide a bit of a cost range there. Again, this is trying to apply sort of the pretty picture postcard visualizations we saw last time to what we would create here. So again, there's many steps as we continue to evolve this, but it's our first attempt to try to quantify what each of these would be. Each of these budgets is sort of backed with a program, so going through and saying, you know, based on the middle school, we believe there'd be this number of students per lunch period. Again, making some estimates right now, having serving and kitchens and all those types of things included where applicable. But again, there's quite a bit of duplication that does exist in terms of how we would budget these as projects. If we were to say, for example, yes, we want to do all of the Logan Middle School projects, we would redo the budget based on that because there would be economy of scale for doing all of those projects at one particular time. But again, we wanted to kind of give you a general sense of what those various costs would be for all of them. So again, at Logan, just quickly going through the cafeteria commons was suggested as an addition. Tech ed was suggested as an addition, as Joe mentioned, to get them out of the classroom space. When we talk about classroom renovation, that's really kind of going through all of the academic areas of the building and updating those spaces, replacing flooring, painting walls, replacing ceiling lighting within all of the classrooms, probably trying to incorporate some of those collaborative type spaces. Again, you saw in the pretty pictures last time. And then in addition to that, maybe it's just an investment in furniture. So again, I broke that number out to just say, okay, well, maybe we don't want to go forward with a massive renovation project, but we just want to update the furniture because that can have a pretty significant impact in the learning spaces as well. As noted for Logan, an addition for the music department, and then a renovation of the auditorium. So the goal there is more or less a like new auditorium where we're replacing seating, lighting, sound systems, curtains, all those types of things within the various space. So again, kind of went through the same process with Longfellow. Noting a couple things here, I did keep Longfellow's Tech Ed within kind of the current location, and the kind of thought was we could hopefully grow within that space and possibly take the fitness space that's kind of in that area, allow that space to grow and build the fitness space as part of the gymnasium addition that we are showing there. So again, just a couple of the various assumptions that were made as part of these numbers. Again, converting the library back to a auditorium, and then we would have to then replicate the library somewhere else, either within the building or as part of an addition as well. Moving on to the high school, again, very similar process here. So central classroom renovation and furniture update. The auditorium renovation, the Tech Ed addition. So in this particular case, that budget number moves the kids up to an addition that would be accessible out of the basement level of the high school, and then does factor in some renovation of the current Tech Ed spaces for likely for expansion of weight and fitness and some of the other academic needs on that lower level. We talked about the outdoor stadium updates. So in this case, it would be updating the bleachers, making an assumption of about 2,400 seats. That might not be the exact number, but starting there with that in the press box, and then adding turf to the football field there. Logan High School, again, some of the similar items here. Again, cafeteria commons renovation. In this particular case, we did show what we believe a new 800-seat auditorium addition would be. Again, roughly 15.5 to 18 million, we'll round up. And then again, looking at the pool, a couple of different options there. If we were to build a new pool, most high schools have roughly an 8-lane pool, 500-ish seats. That's what we've seen in some of the recent ones that we've done. What does that cost as a new facility versus what will we anticipate, as Joe said, to kind of dig out the current pool vessel and rebuild within the current location? Again, Tech Ed at Logan would be both a combination of addition and renovation. So we would expand out in the current location, and then also renovate some of their current spaces, and then some of the updates to the outdoor stadium. Just note that right now that track is a 6-lane track, so the goal would be to expand to an 8-lane track. It's a pretty tight, confined space there, so we'd actually have to kind of change a little bit of the configuration, but obviously we don't want to impact the work that was done with the turf in that location. So again, the kind of the bleachers and the track update would probably go hand in hand there, because with reconfiguring and updating that track, we would have to adjust the bleachers accordingly.
And I will say to the track thing, what we did was we replaced the lighting in 2014 when we did the turf field. We put the lighting where it would be if we were to do an 8-lane track. So in preparation of what the project would look down the road, we presented the lighting in the place where it would be.
So just a couple of other items. Again, these are very high level, very preliminary budgets. In addition, I didn't inflate these numbers out, to a 2026. I'm more or less using today's numbers for this. So again, if a project were considered or planned out for some time into the future, Again, inflation's something we do need to account for and would need to adjust these numbers accordingly. I would hope with any efficiency we get with kind of grouping some of these together, maybe that inflation number isn't quite as noticeable in terms of what the overall numbers would look like.
And so, initial feedback, tech ed spaces at middle and high schools, cafeteria, commons areas, learning environment in general, band and music to the first floor, and maintain the pool, planetarium, and outdoor athletic facilities. And so I guess we'll open that to any questions or turn it over.
Nell, I saw your hand up. And the initial feedback was from last meeting,
Yeah.
just so that's clear for everybody.
Just a clarification, when the header is tabbed over, is that number included in the above number, or is it in addition? So classroom, for Logan High, classroom renovation, is the furniture cost included in the 13 million? Those are two separate numbers, okay.
Other questions? Yep, Kathy, I'm coming.
So when you're talking about replacing the turf at Central that's on the football field that they have there, would it be the type of turf that Logan's field has? It would be artificial turf, or okay. And then in the tech ed renovations, would you be adding like the car lift to Logan High School, and would you be doing something like that at Central? And then the last one, with the swimming pool, where it's new pool or renovation, would the renovation of the existing pool make it so that it could be competition worthy and eligible, or would it still be just a practice pool that they couldn't compete at?
We haven't gotten that to that level. Some of the challenges we have with renovation of existing pools is there's certain codes we have to follow in terms of the distances from the walls and the locker rooms and those types of things. So my gut feeling is we might not have an 8-lane competition pool. It might be a 6-lane competition pool. But again, we'd have to kind of work with that. I don't think it'll be an apples to apples comparison with a new pool where we can, again, build it how we want. There's probably going to be some challenges that we have making it fit within that existing box. Yeah.
Other questions of Mr. Selly or Mr. Labina? Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. So again, the reminder for the committee, for folks who are just observing, again, the district or the community was clear in the past year or so about like really valuing a both high schools, and then that idea. And so one of the moves the system has made at the secondary level is to consolidate middle schools, right? So from 3 to 2. So in that effort now, so with that kind of commitment to that, based on the community input of recent, the idea was like, so we recognize there are some differences in facilities and experiences, if you will. And so the effort of this is to try to get input from the committee while you're gathered around this area about like what moves might you make in facilities that would help, particularly around that question, equalize opportunities for students regardless of the middle school they're at, and these are parts of those things. Where would you prioritize? So now, yeah, with that in mind or whatever else.
Something else. So did you hear about, just kidding. A question I have is it possible to get a rough ballpark of the scale that is of improvements that's possible within kind of normal current budgetary situations as compared to referenda required for these projects?
All of this would require a referendum. There's no way we could do any of these projects. I mean, you would have to have room in your budget to be able to bond locally. We can do about $1 million a year. So there's only so much you can do before you have to go to referendum. So pretty limited in terms of what's possible for us to do without a referendum. So from my perspective, this is less about like what you think the community will pass and more about what you think is best for kids. And then it's the school board's job to like parse through like the details of that other stuff. This is more about creating high quality opportunities for kids that will speak for itself in terms of the viability of that in the future.
Just to kind of put this into perspective with what we did in the first part of the night, the difference between these 4 options that are on the white piece of paper is $1.8 million in 1 year savings. And I see that for Longfellow, this is about $28 million of expenses. For Logan and for Central, it's about $35 million. And for Logan High, it's about $81 million. So the difference of what we're talking about, I mean, this is the financial impact. This is the big stuff. The closing of these schools is a very small amount compared to what we're talking about here. I just want to make sure that we're all aware of that.
Other comments or questions before we get you into your table talk? Okay, what we're looking, so again, you gave some initial feedback, and part of the feedback you got, you might remember this task was first introduced back in the July meeting. Then Mr. Selly just referred to, you saw a number of visuals last time about this, and then part of the feedback is, can we get some costs with some of these ideas? And so now they're coming back with that information with the costs in mind. So the initial feedback that, again, Mr. Levina just shared, that came from you. That was basically the table themes we got from you without the budgetary stuff, in which, again, maybe now that impacts this a bit. So with that in mind, we have a little more time tonight with this, which we're intentionally trying to do. So I'd like to ask you first, as your tables, like we usually do, get a timekeeper, get a scribe, and get a reporter. There should be a sheet that has at your table, whoever's the scribe would actually be keeping notes that we'll collect, please, around the 3 questions. So again, remember the purpose of this, to what Dr. Engel is just saying, I want to reinforce this. Why we're asking you to do this is to equalize opportunities for students. So with that in mind, what might you prioritize as most important among the list? Part B is like what factors, when you talked about your prioritization, were most important to you. Certainly cost might be a reason, but there might be other things, right? I mean, plenty of things, particularly around equalizing opportunities, but curious about what priorities. And then lastly, what other information might you be needed to assist any recommendations on this area further? So again, if you would have a timekeeper, a reporter, and a scribe. The scribe, we will collect your notes. We're going to get you back at let's say a quarter after 8. So that'll give you about 20 some minutes. And then at that time, we're looking for a scribe to give us about a 1 minute, 9 to 2 minute summary, just a quick one, because we'll collect your notes, but just an overall taste of what's in the room. So just know that scribe's looking for a very efficient one. And then we'll get you on the way by 8:30. Thanks again. We'll see you back at 8:15 for report outs. Okay, can we get your attention back, please? It is 8:15, 8:16 in fact. So I want to get us, again, honor your time well. Thank you for the processing. Again, what we're looking for is we are going to collect your notes. So again, we don't need to hear the exhaustive, like point by point piece, because we're going to collect it. You'll see it as part of the preparation for next meeting. But I do want to, again, it seems like there's a value for like taking a minute or a minute and a half. Like here's like some big things that came out of our table, just so you can at least get a sense of what people are thinking around the questions. So Carl is going to model that for us and start with the first table. So Carl, please.
So we said pretty much when we went through all of these, we felt that classroom renovation was one of the more important items for each school, just because it affects the most number of students. We thought that it would be really interesting to hear what the students and what the teachers of the schools that have these potential improvements, how they would rank some of these things. We felt like we really don't know enough at this point to make real big decisions here, and we kind of felt that this is something that another committee should probably tackle.
There's a lot of detail here. Was there any key factors just on that question that really came to mind? Was the one about like it touched the most kids, it's why the classroom?
The key factor would be the number of students impacted. Yep.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Reporter out here. Okay, great.
Okay, so we looked at, we thought maybe tech ed would be like the area, like all of them need tech ed updates, it looks like, and that's a thing that for us, kids can walk out the door with those skills and maybe go to TC, or we can form partnerships with TC, and it's job related for lots and lots of kids. And so that's why we kind of started with tech ed. And then like our next one was the Logan Middle School music thing, because it does not make any sense to haul your instruments up and down 3 flights of stairs. Classroom renovations. Cafeteria was the other one that was kind of a big one on our list. Just because commons areas, like I teach at Logan and our commons space is way small for our kids to all be able to be at to eat lunch and things like that. So I think those are important pieces for school days for kids too.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you very much. Next table. Joan.
Yeah, so ours was very similar to the first group. So our priority, or what we think is most important, is what'll have the largest impact on the most amount of kids. So classrooms and furniture was the first choice, and then cafeteria, common space where necessary was kind of our second choice. And then in regards to the third, or what information we need, it was that we thought we should learn more from parents, students, and teachers in the facilities and see data as to, you know, what do we get out of spending the money in what areas, and help prioritize that way.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, Heidi.
All right, table 3, very similar to table 2 and table 5. So we took a look at, to equalize opportunities for students at both the middle school and the high school, the most important projects we identified were the shared space that all of the students utilize. So what benefits the most number of students and what impacts those students the most. So looking at that, it looks like the cafeteria, classroom renovations, auditorium renovations. I won't go through the details. Key factors we used to determine these facility projects. Basically, we just took a look. If we had to identify, looking at this list, you know, we took a little different route with the tech ed. We said that it's obviously important, but looking out into the future, what does a tech ed program look like? So that kind of goes into C, which is what other information is needed to assist the FAC in conducting its work relative to this task. We really would like to take a look at what the classroom of the future looks like, including some of those tech ed classes, and making sure that we're planning for the future, not right now.
Thank you so much. And then Nell, closing it up.
For the most part, it's a repeat about impact over total students and focusing there. We did talk about tech ed as an important thing that expands opportunities for students, but the thing that we talked about that was different was how can we get the Iowa deal where there's a 1% sales tax that funds school buildings. That would be great. We wouldn't be here then. Anybody got a line on that? That was Bill. Yeah, that was Bill.
Thank you Thank you very much, everyone. So again, we're looking for your scribed notes. So again, keep those. We also now have some QR, some question response forms, those sorts of things. And of course, there's a quick opportunity for you to give us some feedback, as always. So appreciate all those things. We are next going to meet again in about a month, October 17th. What we're anticipating was the developing and refining the FAC report. We still would probably start seeing some of that come out. One part I would say is I think we're going to come back with the refined elementary school boundary options. I think, as I mentioned, you'll see that in addition to what you see highlighted. So I just want to make that point from based on our earlier conversation, kind of what we saw here. I think we'll do some again reflection about what you share, what might be helpful yet. Probably revisit that at some point, and then still continue to move forward with our tasks. So just know that that's there. Again, same place, October 17th, same time, 6 o'clock. Thanks again for the observers. Thanks again for the committee. We'll adjourn it now, and thanks so much. Have a safe travel home. See you soon.